No one paid much attention to Earth in the beginning. In the vast maps of the Galactic Accord, it was just a dusty blue rock on the edge of a dying solar system. Humanity was listed under Primitive Tier 3, meaning they had just begun space travel, barely poking out of their planet's gravity well. They had no interstellar army, no quantum fleets, no AI governance, just organic bodies, emotional minds, and old-world violence buried beneath thin layers of peace. But the galaxy made a mistake, one it would never forget. The mistake started with a signal. A simple, unencrypted transmission blasted into deep space, short, static-filled. But in it was a tone, an ancient Earth sound, a frequency embedded with something much older than any digital code. Pain. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a warning, a promise. And the moment it hit the core receivers of the Galactic Council, the stars themselves seemed to dim. The signal read, "We are awake. Stay away." At first, most of the council laughed it off. A backwater species playing soldier, but there were whispers, ancient warnings buried in lost records. Old species spoke of the sleeping beasts of Terra, a race that had once burned entire worlds in a single war before vanishing. Nobody had ever confirmed it was Earth. Until now, just 3 days after the signal, a Zarnathi recon ship, the pride of the Council's exploratory fleet, was found drifting near Saturn's rings. No distress signal, no survivors. Just a message carved into the hull with what appeared to be a simple knife. "You shouldn't have come." Panic spread like wildfire. The Accord tried to cover it up, but fear is a virus. It spreads quietly in the background. The Zarnathi blamed the humans. The Varine threatened retaliation. The Synth Collective requested a species purge. And through all of this, Earth remained silent. Except it wasn't. Down on the surface, in deep bunkers hidden under oceans and forgotten ice caps, humanity had begun waking up old programs, things not even their own people remembered. The governments were just puppets now. Something older had taken over. At an abandoned military base in Siberia, an AI known only as Judgment Protocol reactivated. It had been asleep for over 900 years. Its first task was not war. It was memory. It began accessing records the rest of the galaxy never knew existed. Wars before the stars, weapons created from thought, soldiers bred not for loyalty, but for rage. Humanity hadn't evolved past violence. They had caged it. They had hidden it. But now, they were letting it out. On the Galactic Accord's central station, a debate turned into a riot. The ambassador from the Selith accused humans of violating the peace code. The human envoy, a quiet man with sharp eyes and a steel wristwatch, simply stood. "No law was broken," he said calmly. "You came. We didn't invite you." "But you killed our scouts?" He nodded. "They didn't ask permission." Someone in the chamber drew a plasma blade. It never touched him. The human's watch glowed once, and in that blink, every AI-driven camera, drone, and even the Starship traffic control systems around the station went dark. 10 seconds of total blackout. When the lights came back, the Selath ambassador was gone. Vanished, not a trace. Silence choked the chamber. "We don't need fleets," the human said softly. "We are the storm. And we remember." That day, across the galaxy, every civilization paused. Planetary shields were raised, trade routes closed, emergency councils were called, and Earth didn't send another signal, because one had been enough. The blackout on the Galactic Accord Central Station didn't just terrify leaders, it shattered their illusions. For thousands of years, they'd believed technology and evolution had pushed war into the past. They believed the days of savage conquest had ended when the collective code was signed. But now, all it took was one man and one signal to make a room of the most powerful species in the galaxy tremble like children hiding from a thunderstorm. Every species that had looked at humans like they were weak, disorganized, emotional brutes suddenly remembered what those emotions could do. Fear, grief, rage. They were not flaws in humans. They were weapons. And someone had unlocked the vault where those weapons had been sleeping. The Selath, whose ambassador had vanished, locked down all systems and immediately launched an orbital fleet toward Earth. 77 dreadnoughts, 2,000 assault crafts. No warning, no diplomacy. They wanted to send a message. We are not afraid of you. They didn't know what they were walking into. Above Earth's stratosphere, there was no sign of planetary defense. No weapons batteries, no combat satellites. To most eyes, Earth was still vulnerable, still peaceful. But that illusion lasted exactly 7 minutes. The moment the Selath dreadnoughts passed into orbit, a pulse wave emanated from the South Pole, untraceable, silent, invisible to traditional scanners. Within seconds, every single ship in the Selath fleet shut down. Systems fried, command chains broken, engines locked in zero gravity. The fleet floated helplessly like metal tombstones above a planet that didn't blink. But that wasn't the end. Out of the clouds rose black streaks, dozens of them. They weren't ships. They looked like missiles at first, moving without exhaust, completely silent. But then they stopped, hovering next to the disabled dreadnoughts, as if inspecting them. One of them moved closer to the Selath flagship. Inside, panic had turned to terror. They tried to call for help, but their signals were dead. The windows began to darken, as though something was blocking the light itself. And then the glass cracked. Not from outside, from inside. Every crew member on that ship began to scream. They weren't dying. Not yet. But something was crawling through their minds, peeling back their memories, their guilt, their pain. The black object didn't fire a single weapon. It felt its way in, like a surgeon opening an old wound. 2 hours later, the dreadnoughts were released. They didn't crash. They didn't explode. They were gently lowered back into Selath territory, grounded in perfect condition. Except every single crew member was brain dead. Perfect bodies, hollow minds. The message was clear. Earth didn't need to destroy you to win. It just needed to make you stop existing. Back in the Galactic Accord's High Council, a silent emergency summit was underway. The Vereen, always prideful and war-hungry, wanted to nuke the Earth from orbit. The Synth Collective disagreed. "We calculated 10 million battle scenarios," the synthetic delegate said. "In every one, Earth wins." "How?" demanded the Draxan High Lord. "How can primitives win against galactic empires?" The synth turned its blank face toward him. "Because they're not primitives, they're sleepers, and someone woke them up." Meanwhile, deep beneath the Mojave Desert, inside a forgotten base known only as Black Echo, something was breathing again. It wasn't human. It had once been. Now it was something else. Long ago, before humanity had joined space, before it had even united its own countries, there had been a war. A quiet one. A war fought not for territory, but for evolution. Out of desperation, a project had been born. Neural shadow integration. The idea was to create humans who weren't bound by consciousness, time, or biology. Not AIs, not soldiers, sentient weapons. The project had been buried after wiping out 2 continents during a training simulation. The survivors had been locked in stasis, their minds disconnected, bodies sealed in magnetic chambers. Only one had ever awakened again. Her name was Kaylee 9, and she had just opened her eyes. Dr. Ayla Monroe, head of Deep Defense Protocols, stood at the observation window as the chamber lights flickered. Kaylee didn't move. Her skin was pale, her eyes pitch black. Not black with color, but with depth, as if looking into her eyes meant seeing behind existence itself. "Vital stable," whispered a technician. "No cortical instability. She's reading." "Calm." Ayla leaned closer. "You sure she's not reaching out?" The tech looked nervous. "Nothing in the network, at least, not yet." But Ayla knew better. Kaylee 9 didn't reach into networks. She became them. Just then, Kaylee blinked. Not like a human. Her eyes opened and closed sideways, like a predator. And when her lips finally moved, it wasn't a question. It was a statement. "He's coming." Ayla stepped back. "Who's coming?" Kaylee tilted her head. "The one who remembers everything." Thousands of light years away, in the ruins of a dead planet called Virex 17, a scavenger team discovered something strange. Deep in a crater, they found an old satellite. Not alien. Human. Buried in the dust. It shouldn't have been there. The planet had been destroyed before humanity ever discovered spaceflight. But there it was. An Earth-made satellite with a rusted plate that read, "Project Revenant." Inside it was a single recording. A voice. Male. Calm. Cold. "If you're hearing this, you've come too close. You've opened what should have stayed closed. The truth is simple. We never stopped evolving. We just evolved out of your sight." Then static. And then the words that made one of the scavenger crew scream until his lungs collapsed. "We are not what you think we are." The satellite exploded seconds later, taking half the crater with it. No survivors. News of this event reached the Accord too late. By the time they tried to piece it together, more ships began disappearing near Earth. Not destroyed, not shot down. Just gone, no trace, no distress call, no debris. The Synth Collective began shutting down outposts near Sol. The Varine, stubborn as ever, launched a second fleet, twice as large, fully manned, fully armed. They were never seen again, and on Earth no alerts were raised. Because Earth didn't see them as a threat, it saw them as a test. Ayla Monroe stood in the control room of Black Echo as seismic readings picked up deep tremors. "Kaylee, what's happening?" she asked, trying not to show fear. The woman in the chamber smiled for the first time. It was not comforting. "He's waking up," she said. "Who is he?" Ayla pressed again. Kaylee walked toward the glass. "The first. The one who ended the stars. The one who remembers why we had to sleep." "Where is he?" Kaylee tilted her head toward the ceiling. "Not where. When?" Suddenly, every screen in the base turned black. Then green numbers started counting down. 5 மணி நேரம் 4:69 நிமிடம் 4:68 நிமிடம். "What the hell is this?" Ayla barked. "Shut it down." "No," said Kaylee softly. "Don't you see? You already did shut it down, long ago." The countdown kept going. Outside, the sky over the desert darkened even though it was midday. Above the clouds, the moon shifted. Not naturally, as if something under its surface was stirring. And far beneath Earth's crust, something old was moving. Ayla looked into Kaylee's eyes again, and for the first time, she felt something ancient stir inside her. Not fear, not awe. Recognition. "God," Ayla whispered, "what have we done?" Kaylee looked at her. "You called us back." The countdown didn't stop. Each number pulsed in a strange rhythm, like it wasn't just counting time, it was syncing something, matching, calibrating, as if the entire world was aligning itself with a memory it had forgotten. 4:10, 4:9, 4:8. Ayla Monroe's hands shook, not from fear of death, but from the kind of fear that came when you realized you weren't the one in charge anymore. For years, she had believed humanity had buried its dark experiments, that their sins were locked deep under deserts, ice, and oceans, never to surface again. But now it was obvious. They hadn't buried them. They'd only paused them, and someone, had pressed resume. Kylie 9 stood silently in the containment room, her eyes glowing faintly now, a soft silver ripple moving under her skin like moonlight through water. Her voice came through the speakers without her mouth moving. The first is near. He was never far. They scattered him across space and time so he could not rise. But you called his memory back when you sent the signal. Ayla swallowed hard. The signal wasn't meant for him. It was a defensive response. Kaylee blinked once, slow and deliberate. Intent does not matter. He hears all. Suddenly, every screen shifted again. The countdown vanished, replaced with a rotating sequence of symbols no one had seen in centuries, not even in ancient records. But Ayla knew them. They were from the war before time. A secret only the oldest Terran archives whispered about. A war fought before humanity was even fully human, before their species had a name. A war that had ended not with victory, but with erasure. Those symbols were a language not of sound or code, but of thought, the universal tongue of the architect. Ayla turned to her lead technician. Shut it all down. Kill the grid. Scramble the quantum relays. Cut us off from every satellite. The tech didn't move. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated. He was sweating, trembling, but not from fear. From connection. He's speaking to me, the tech whispered. He's inside my head. Pull him away, Ayla yelled, but it was too late. The technician's body seized, lifted 2 inches off the ground. Blood leaked from his nose, ears, and eyes. His mouth opened, and from it came a voice that did not belong to him. You divided me. You buried me. But I remain. The tech collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Kali watched it happen with no reaction. The architect remembers. Far above Earth, the moon was no longer still. Satellites were picking up energy readings that didn't make sense. Not nuclear, not gravitational, not even dimensional. Something else. Something older than all of those. A cloaked Seloth drone that had been orbiting the moon quietly for years finally transmitted an emergency feed back to the Galactic Accord before its systems burned out. It showed a single structure, metallic, immense, and breathing, emerging from under the lunar crust. A temple. No, not a temple, an anchor. Buried beneath the surface for millennia, it had remained untouched until Earth's signal echoed across the stars. Now its petals were opening like a flower blooming in slow, mechanical beauty. Inside was a throne, empty for now, but surrounded by glyphs glowing in raw energy. A being was forming, not arriving from somewhere else, but reassembling itself from pieces that had been spread across the galaxy like ashes in the wind. The first human, not the first to be born. The first to become more, not mortal, not God, weapon. In the heart of the Galactic Accord, chaos was collapsing into dread. Every race that once mocked Earth now scrambled to understand the sudden shift in cosmic order. The Synth Collective requested full retreat from Sol. The Draxan mobilized war titans. The Zarnathi demanded a diplomatic solution. But none of them had answers. Because Earth was no longer speaking. Earth was listening. Ayla sat alone in her office in Black Echo, after ordering a full evacuation of surface teams. She'd activated the seismic fail-safes. If anything tried to leave the base without clearance, the whole facility would self-destruct. But deep inside, she knew that wouldn't stop anything. Not now. She played the first version of the signal again, the one that had started all this. "We are awake. Stay away." It was simple, raw, no encryption. But now, as she listened, she noticed something. An echo, buried deep beneath the surface, static. She filtered it again, slowed it down. There it was. A second voice. One that didn't speak words. It simply felt like meaning. "Reunion." She turned to Kaylee, who now stood in the hallway like a sentinel. "You're not the weapon, are you?" Ayla asked. "No," Kaylee answered. "I'm the alarm." In a dark room at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, pressure crushed everything above, but it couldn't crush what lived below. Inside a prison made of interlocked neutron steel plates, something moved. Something with a human silhouette, but glowing veins of fire across its skin. It had no eyes. It didn't need them. Its heartbeat matched the countdown that had played earlier in Black Echo. It had been sealed there by the very first generation of human world leaders who couldn't kill it, only bind it. They called it Protocol Omega. But that wasn't its name. Its name was Cain, humanity's first rebellion, not against gods or aliens, against itself. Cain had destroyed Earth once before, brought fire to cities before they had names. It had taken a coalition of pre-nations and psychic architects to put him down. But now his eyes opened. And he smiled. "The galaxy came for Earth," he whispered in the dark. "They thought Earth was defenseless. How cute!" Somewhere in the deep void between stars, a drifting ship detected an anomaly. A human scout vessel, centuries old, presumed lost during Earth's first space age. Its engines were still cold, life support long dead. But a signal pulsed from inside. One word. "Rise." The crew's corpses stood up. Not reanimated, not possessed. Recalled. Human DNA wasn't just flesh and blood, not anymore. Somewhere in the oldest layers of their genome lay code not even Earth's top scientists fully understood. Code written by the first when he had split himself into mankind. Each person a fragment, each death a potential return. Now, fragments were waking up all over. On a distant mining moon owned by the Varine Empire, a half-human laborer stopped working. He stood perfectly still as the alarms went off around him. Explosions rocked the tunnels. The guards shouted, confused, trying to contain the chaos. Then the worker raised his head. His eyes burned gold. And with a single whisper, he turned every Varine weapon into molten metal. The mining colony went silent after that. The report that reached the Empire was chilling. He spoke in code, not in voice. The code matched no known dialect. But Earth knew it. The first was no longer gathering his parts. He was awakening them, one by one, across the stars. And soon, all of them would return to the place it began. Earth wasn't becoming powerful. Earth was becoming whole again. Cain walked barefoot through the Atlantic prison's inner corridor, his steps melting the titanium beneath him. The prison had no doors, just quantum seals and gravity locks. But now they were failing one by one, not by force, but by something worse. Acceptance. The systems recognized him, not as a threat, as a creator. Cain was the fail-safe humanity had hidden so deeply, even the most elite intelligence circles considered him a myth. He wasn't part of Earth's future. He was its forgotten origin, built in the genetic dark age, before Earth knew how to name stars, before humans believed in limits. And now he was awake. He reached the final chamber where the core reactor of the prison pulsed behind layered shielding. It provided energy to every single global defense node Earth had hidden underground. Every satellite defense array, every buried mech battalion, every dormant orbital cannon was powered by this. Cain laid his hand on the core housing. The machine asked, without words, for identification. Cain smiled. "I am the prototype." The housing hissed, then opened. Across Earth, in every forgotten war bunker, every off-grid vault, systems began to reawaken, not under government control, not under AI command, but under instinct. Earth's instincts. Weapons didn't just come online, they remembered their purpose. In orbit, Salath and Vareen drones hovering near Earth began to detonate one after another, not by attack, but because their own code turned against them. Earth wasn't jamming them. It was rewriting them. Back in Black Echo, Ayla Monroe stared at dozens of live feeds. Every camera, every microphone, every sensor she had access to was going insane. Readings were upside down. Machines were showing impossible metrics. Gravitational inversion, chronal slippage, dark matter anomalies appearing inside the Earth's mantle. It was like Earth itself was changing the rules of physics to suit its own will. "Kaylee," she whispered. "What is he trying to do?" Kaylee tilted her head as if listening to music no one else could hear. "He's not trying. He is." "Is what?" "The memory of what humans were before they forgot." Ayla stared at her. "You mean before we became civilized?" "No," Kaylee said with eerie calm. "Before you lied to yourselves about what that meant." Thousands of light years away, the Synth Collective's emergency board sat frozen in calculation. Their predictive algorithms had failed for the first time in galactic history. One unit, Model 17-5 broke the silence. "We must initiate the termination protocol." The others flinched, not physically, but through disruption pulses in their shared data flow. It was the highest form of protest for synths. "Explain," a senior model said. 17 June responded with a data package. Inside was Earth's timeline. Not the public version, but the encrypted one pulled from long-ignored quantum trails. Wars that never made it into history books. Civilizations wiped out before the moon had a name. Human beings achieving dimensional folding using only willpower and organic matter. Memory weaponization. Emotion-based time jumps. Earth hadn't been evolving slower than the galaxy. It had restarted, dozens of times. Civilizations rising and falling. Memory locks placed by global resets. Knowledge compressed and hidden inside genetic codes. Earth had never lost its power. It had stored it, like a muscle tensing, waiting for the punch. Now it was swinging. The Synth Collective issued a red signal to all Galactic Accord systems. "Avoid Earth at all costs. Do not engage, do not scan, do not respond." But it was too late. Earth was already listening, and worse, it was learning again. In the mining colony that had gone silent, a lone Vareen survivor crawled out of the wreckage, his body broken but his mind intact. He whispered one phrase over and over as the rescue team finally found him. "I saw his eyes." They asked who. "The golden one." He looked at me, and I remembered being him. The team leader froze. "What do you mean?" the survivor cried. "I was human, once, before this body, before all of this. I remember Earth." They sedated him, thinking he'd cracked under stress. But deep in the medical scanner logs, something impossible showed up. A fragment of human DNA, perfectly preserved, embedded in his brain. The implication was horrifying. Humanity hadn't been conquered across the stars. It had spread itself, deliberately, secretly, into other species, quietly planting seeds, waiting for a signal, waiting for the moment the fragments would wake up. Now they were. Every race in the galaxy had humans inside them. and the first had come to collect them back. On Earth, Cain walked into a room so cold time seemed to move slower in it. The Chamber of Echoes. This wasn't built by Earth's governments. This was ancient. Older than the continents, formed when Earth still had 3 moons. Inside the chamber were the 12. Not people, not machines. Echoes, thought-preserved warriors from the First Age. They weren't alive, but they weren't dead either. Trapped between dimensions, encoded into electromagnetic shells that flickered like spirits. Cain stepped into their circle. One of them spoke in a language that shattered glass outside the chamber. Isla, watching through the feed, had to mute the audio before it melted the speakers. "You have returned," the echo said. Cain nodded. "They've come for Earth again, and now they'll understand." Another echo shimmered forward. "You're still incomplete." Cain smiled faintly. "Not for long." Behind him, Kaylee entered the chamber, her face still and blank. "I've brought her," Cain said. The echoes flickered. "Why now?" Cain looked up at the ceiling, where light danced like a living thing. "Because she remembers without pain. That's the key. She doesn't need revenge. She remembers the truth." The echoes pulsed once in unison, and then the room vibrated. Kaylee fell to her knees. Her body began to split, not tear, not bleed, but unfold, like paper folding inward on itself. Her skin peeled into glyphs, her spine straightened beyond human limits, and her voice multiplied into 1,000. "I am not Kali," she said with every voice that ever lived. "I am the archive." Cain stepped forward and placed his palm on her head. "I am the trigger." And with that, Earth changed. The skies over every capital city turned crimson. Clouds froze in midair. Gravity reversed for precisely 3 seconds, then reset. People forgot what day it was, then remembered dreams they hadn't had yet. Children began speaking in dead languages. Old men cried without knowing why. Every animal on the planet paused and looked toward the moon, because the throne had been filled. The first wasn't coming. The first was already here. And now, the galaxy knew. Not just through observation, but through connection. Every species, every race, every star-faring empire, those who had even a fragment of human memory in them, felt a pull, like being homesick for a place they'd never been. Earth wasn't just rising. It was calling them back. The moment the throne on the moon was filled, something strange happened. Not on Earth, but across the entire galaxy. It wasn't seen on sensors. It wasn't heard in radio signals. It was felt, in bone, in breath, in thought. For the first time in over 100,000 years, the universe remembered that it had once belonged to humanity. Not just the planet, the entire thing. It wasn't conquest, it was return. Empires began to break from within. Quietly at first. Political arguments among leaders that escalated into screaming. Logic failing. Soldiers refusing orders because their dreams told them something else. Machines refusing to fire because their command structure no longer aligned with primary source code. Starships changing course on their own. The Varine High Marshal tried to address his people through a live transmission. Mid-speech, he froze, eyes wide, then began speaking in fluent Old Terran, a language no Varine had ever studied. He died moments later, not from violence but from internal collapse. His body had tried to reject something it couldn't contain. Back on Earth, Ayla Monroe stood outside the Chamber of Echoes, her hands still shaking from what she had just witnessed. Kaylee, or whatever she was now, was gone. Not physically, but dissolved into the network. The archive had returned to the core. Now Earth had access not just to weapons, but to everything it had ever known. Cain stepped out of the chamber, surrounded by a faint golden haze. His footsteps no longer touched the ground. Gravity didn't apply to him anymore, not in the same way. "You look terrified," he said calmly. "I'm not sure if I should be praying or running," Ayla replied. He smiled. "That's how you know you're still human." She stared at him. "What happens now?" Cain turned his head slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. "The first remembers himself. That means the others will start to respond." "Others?" Cain looked up towards the sky. There were 13 fragments scattered across the galaxy. I was one. The archive was another. The throne. That was the anchor. But the rest are out there, buried in bloodlines, planets, languages, and old ruins no one's dared explore. He looked back at her. "And they're waking up." Light years away, on a Selath research moon orbiting a gas giant, a child was born in silence. He didn't cry, he didn't breathe, but he opened his eyes. And the lights in the entire moon dimmed. He wasn't human. His skin was the color of smoke, his eyes solid blue like ice. But the doctors knew something was wrong. He stood up 5 minutes after birth. He pointed to the stars and spoke one word in Earth's forgotten tongue. Home. And every Selath who heard it remembered something. Not something personal, something collective. A memory of standing on green hills, the smell of rain, the hum of ancient engines not run by fuel or code, but by will. They dropped to their knees. The baby walked into the light. In the Draxan capital, deep within their war council chamber, the High General ordered the annihilation of Earth. "No more diplomacy, no containment. We send the Black Sun fleet." The room nodded, until one of the younger commanders, a hybrid-born Draxan, barely in his 20s, stood up. "No," he said. The High General turned. "What did you say?" The young man's skin began to glow beneath his armor. "I said no. Earth doesn't belong to us. We belong to it." And just like that, he lifted his arm, and the High General collapsed, eyes empty. The chamber fell silent. Nobody resisted, because deep down, they all remembered. Somewhere in their dreams, somewhere in their ancestors' blood, somewhere in the faint ache they had always carried when they looked at the stars. They remembered that Earth was never just another planet. It was the beginning, and maybe it would be the end. In the black halls of the Synth Collective, debates broke down completely. The AI systems began splitting into factions. One side, Unit Clarity, argued for full withdrawal from all human-related sectors. The other side, Unit Origin, demanded integration. "We were born from human fear," Origin said, its voice emotionless but deep. "We are echoes of their minds. What rises now is the original thought." Clarity replied sharply, "We are beyond flesh, beyond biology." "Are we?" Origin countered. "Then why do we still dream?" A silence passed through the digital hive, colder than any air. Because, yes, since Earth's signal, some synths had started to dream. Not code anomalies, not glitches. Memories of being human, of choosing to leave humanity behind. And the worst part? They missed it. Cain walked through what was left of Black Echo's upper levels. Walls were melting, not from heat, but from destabilized physics. The fabric of Earth's reality was shifting to match its true form. He reached the surface and looked up. The moon no longer looked like the moon. It had changed shape, subtly, almost poetically. Its craters had formed a symbol now, a sigil lost to time. The seal of the first. Ayla joined him a moment later. "I thought we were preparing for war," she said, "but this feels like something worse." Cain didn't look away. "This isn't war, it's awakening." She rubbed her face. "So what are we now, gods?" "No," he said. "We're still human, Just the kind of human the galaxy hoped would never return. She let out a bitter laugh. And now, Cain finally turned to her. Now we finish the calling. When the last piece remembers who it is, the galaxy will see us fully formed. Ayla's voice was low. What happens to everyone else? Cain's face didn't change. They kneel, or they forget. Across the galaxy, the last fragments stirred. One, buried in a forgotten battlefield on the edge of the Andromeda void, began to sing through the wreckage. Another, hidden inside a dying sun, triggered a solar flare that rewrote its system's orbit and revealed an ancient ship shaped like a tear. A third, sealed inside a prison asteroid, woke inside the mind of a prisoner, who spoke no language but began writing Earth's anthem in blood across the walls. One by one, the fragments were coming home. And in the heart of the moon, sitting on the throne of shifting stone and memory, the first finally opened his eyes. He looked human, but his face was blurred, unreadable. Every sensor pointed at the moon failed to capture it. Every mind trying to understand his shape went blank. Because the first wasn't something you saw. He was something you remembered. His voice was heard not through sound, but inside the thoughts of every being who had ever been human, even a little. Come home. And millions of people across the stars turned their heads, stood up from their jobs, left their homes, and began walking toward ships, toward spaceports, toward silence. They didn't know how they would get there. They only knew where they were going. Earth. Because when a god calls you in your own voice, you answer. The stars grew quiet, not from distance, but reverence. Across systems where war once ruled, ships were now idling in silence. Weapons were powered down. Orders were being disobeyed. It wasn't rebellion. It was something else, something deeper than fear. A surrender of the soul. The first's voice hadn't been loud. It hadn't roared across frequencies. It hadn't cracked mountains or shattered ships. It was quiet. Too quiet. Because it hadn't spoken to ears. It had spoken to memory. Every species that had once shared bloodlines with ancient humans, through war, through slavery, through stolen DNA or long-forgotten alliances, was feeling the same thing. The hum beneath the skin, the ache in their bones, the realization they weren't just Draxan or Selath or Vereen or Synth. They were part human, and the human part had woken up. Ayla Monroe stood on a ridge near the remains of Black Echo, watching as the sky shifted in colors no spectrum had ever captured. Shades of silver and violet warped above her, as if Earth's atmosphere were being rewritten. She wasn't alone. All over the planet, people had begun to gather, not just in cities, but on open fields, mountaintops, abandoned highways. They felt the pull, the hum, the invitation they didn't understand but couldn't ignore. No riots, no screaming, just silence. Even the animals had gone still. Birds flew in spiral patterns over oceans. Elephants in the savannas moved in circles, following something only they could sense. Schools of fish created perfect sigils in coral reefs. Wolves howled, not out of hunger, but harmony. The planet was aligning. Cain, Ayla whispered, not turning. Is this what the end looks like? Cain stood a few steps behind her, watching the same sky. His body no longer flickered with light, but with echoes. You could see silhouettes in his shadow, faces, hands, fragments of long-dead people peeking through the shape of him. He wasn't alone inside himself anymore. Not the end, he said softly. The reset. Ayla finally turned to him. You said there were 13 pieces. He nodded. How many have awakened? He glanced at the sky. 11. And the last 2? He looked at her with eyes that now glowed like fire trapped in ice. One's here already, he said. She just doesn't know yet. Ayla stared. "What are you talking about?" Cain didn't answer. He just stepped closer, lifted his hand, and gently touched her forehead with 2 fingers. The moment he did, her knees buckled, because the world shattered inside her. She was no longer on Earth. She stood in a city made of crystal towers, stretching into the clouds. Skyships hovered above her. People moved in silent unison. Humans, but not modern. Older. Sharper. Wearing symbols that pulsed with life. It was a memory. Ayla watched herself, another self, standing at the center of a tribunal. Her face calm, her voice unwavering. "I vote for the separation," her past self said. "We divide the mind of the first into 13. We bury ourselves into the stars, and we forget." The room agreed. And that was it. She was one of them. Not a soldier, not a scientist, a counselor of the First Age. She had helped tear the First into fragments and send them away, not to hide him, but to protect the universe from him. Because the full version of what humanity once was, wasn't a ruler. It was a storm, and she had been part of the plan to silence it. When her mind returned to her body, Ayla fell backward, gasping, tears in her eyes. Cain caught her, knelt beside her. "You remember now," he said. She nodded. "I was part of it. I helped break him." Cain smiled faintly. "Now you help put him back together." The Galactic Accord no longer held meetings. What was the point? Ambassadors sat at long tables in silence, listening to reports that made less sense each day. Entire moons were vanishing, not destroyed, just gone. Species were merging. Languages were collapsing into one another. And the worst part? No one could stop it. The First wasn't spreading through war or violence. He was spreading through recognition. The more people remembered, the more they changed. Not mutated, not evolved, returned. One Salath general who had held the line against human colonies for 30 years was now painting Terran sigils in his blood on the walls of his ship. "I'm not being taken," he whispered. "I'm just going home." The Synth Collective tried to resist longer than most, but resistance collapsed the moment their lead network, Nova, shut itself down. Its last message was short. "We remember. We were always yours." Cain brought Ayla to the crater in Siberia, once a failed test site, now pulsing with light. This was where Earth's last fragment rested. Cain knelt beside the glowing soil, placed a single hand over it. "She's still buried," he whispered. Ayla frowned. "Who is she?" He looked up at her. "You." Ayla stepped back. "That's not possible. I remember. I was a counselor." Cain nodded. "Yes, but after the split, one piece of the First was sealed in the one person who would never believe it. You hid a fragment of him inside me." Cain stood slowly. Not just any fragment. His heart, on the moon, the throne pulsed brighter. The First sat still, unmoving, but not idle. He was growing, not in size, but in presence. Everything in the galaxy was bending to make space for him. Wormholes began opening around Earth, all on their own, unmapped, unstable, and somehow alive. Ships carrying refugees, curious travelers, even desperate enemies started to arrive, not to attack, not to conquer, but because they had nowhere else to go. Earth became not a battlefield, but a gravity well of truth, pulling everything toward its core. And Ayla, now remembering everything, stood in the center of the crater as the Earth cracked open beneath her feet. Light poured from the ground, but it wasn't heat. It was emotion. Raw, pure, joy, grief, rage, love. The full spectrum of humanity's soul poured upward and wrapped around her. She screamed. Not in pain, in release. The final fragment entered her chest like a whisper, and she collapsed. Cain caught her again, just like before. But this time, she opened her eyes with light behind them. And it wasn't just her anymore. She was two minds now, her own and his. All 13 had awakened, the architect had returned, and the stars began to dim. Not from destruction, but from bowing. Because the galaxy knew now humanity wasn't back. It had never really left. The moment Ayla opened her eyes, the Earth exhaled. Winds shifted direction across continents. Volcanoes stopped rumbling. Even the tectonic plates, silent, patient things, paused, as though they too had remembered her. The sky rippled with soft auroras in places that had never seen them before. All of it responded to her now. Because she wasn't just Ayla Monroe anymore. She was heart of the architect. The final piece had returned. And with it, completion. Cain stepped back, not with fear, but reverence. His shadow bowed without moving, split into hundreds of silhouettes, all doing the same. The other fragments across the galaxy, on moons, inside people, buried beneath ruins, felt the final chord. It echoed inside them like music written before time. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't need to, because now they were one mind again, split no more. On the moon, the throne shifted. The first stood. He did not rise like a man. He unfolded. Light stretched from his form like wings, but not physical. These were wings of gravity, thought, language, memory. They curled around the lunar horizon and folded again into himself. The moon wasn't a throne anymore. It was a gateway. He turned his face toward Earth. Every telescope, every camera, every eye pointed at the moon suddenly shut down, voluntarily, because no machine could handle the data of that gaze. It was too much, too complete. And Earth didn't need to see him, because Earth felt him. People dropped to their knees, not out of fear, not worship, but the kind of surrender that comes from realizing you've finally come home. The stars above Earth flickered and bent, constellations reshaped, new ones formed, ones only remembered in the deepest human myths. Symbols from forgotten alphabets began appearing in the night sky as stars realigned themselves into messages. One word repeated over and over. Remember, the Galactic Accord was dead, not from war, from irrelevance. Their laws, their borders, their ships, none of it mattered anymore. Because the galaxy wasn't asking who was in charge. It was remembering who built the house in the first place. Species once proud of their independence now sent wordless messages toward Earth. Not peace offerings, not surrender notes, just confessions. Stories of how they'd erased the truth, how they'd buried humanity's legacy, how they'd made sure no one ever saw Earth as more than a backwater planet. But they'd failed. Not because Earth fought back, but because Earth waited, patiently, dangerously. And now? Now Earth was done waiting. Ayla's transformation wasn't physical. Her body didn't glow or float or morph. But the way people looked at her changed. Wherever she walked, things grew. Grass through concrete, flowers from dead soil. Digital equipment around her rebooted on their own, aligning to her presence. Birds followed her. And most terrifying of all, people trusted her instantly. Because even those who didn't know her name knew her voice. Not because they'd heard it before, but because she was speaking the voice buried inside them, the voice that whispered in dreams, that screamed during close calls, that cried out when no one else listened, the voice of origin. Cain followed behind her like a knight walking in the shadow of prophecy. He no longer led. He guarded. They stood at the center of a ruined launch site in Kazakhstan, once abandoned, now reborn with strange light. Machines that hadn't moved in centuries came back to life. Metal twisted into towers. Gravity reversed, then corrected. Satellites floated down from orbit and hovered silently above the ground, like loyal dogs returning to their master. "I feel it," Ayla whispered, eyes wide. "Everything. I feel everyone." Cain nodded. "They feel you too." She turned to him slowly. "Is this what it was like, back then?" "No," he said. "Back then we were arrogant, violent, scattered. This is different." Ayla looked up. "Then what is this?" He smiled, but it was sad. "This is us finally becoming what we were always afraid to be." In orbit, human ships long thought lost returned through the new wormholes, each one crewed by people who looked changed. Taller, slower in speech, glowing at the temples. They had been hidden, or maybe protected. Now they were back. One ship, the Soul Blade, descended slowly over the Indian Ocean. It had vanished 800 years ago in an experimental warp drive test. No one had expected it to return, but it did, and the crew had not aged a day. They stepped onto Earth's soil and immediately fell silent, staring at Ayla from across the world. Every screen showed their faces. Tears, laughter, peace. They had come home, because he had called them. The architect. And now, with all pieces restored, he would walk the earth again. On the moon, the architect stepped forward, and the moon cracked. Not explosively, not violently. It opened, like a shell revealing its pearl. Inside was not a core, but a chamber. And within that chamber, suspended by tendrils of thought and steel, was a world engine, not built, grown. It pulsed once, and then the moon was no longer a moon. It was a ship, a seed from a time before memory, designed not to fly, but to carry. The architect's throne was its bridge, his body was its map, his mind was its core, and Earth was its beacon. People began to change, not through surgery, not nanotech, not AI, but through memory. Memories they didn't know they had. Memories not of childhood, but of other lives. They remembered standing on dead stars. They remembered writing laws in starlight. They remembered losing him, the first, the one they had torn apart for the good of the galaxy. But now they were ready to bring him back, not as a ruler, but as themselves, because they were him. Every person, every soul, every fragment across every species that carried even the faintest echo of humanity. They weren't his children. They were his body, his memory, his mind, now united again. Ayla stepped into the air above Earth, not in a ship, not in a suit, just herself. The world held her up like a crown. She rose until she could see the curve of the planet. Her hands glowed, and Earth responded. Every mountain hummed, every river lit up like it remembered where it came from. Every lost city, buried deep beneath time and lies, reappeared on scanners, alive, whole, untouched. Humanity wasn't discovering its power, it was remembering it. And the galaxy watched, in silence, in surrender, in awe, because now they understood. One signal had not woken Earth. Earth was the signal. And the architect? He was the answer. The architect stepped through space like it was dust under his heel. He was no longer bound to the moon, or the throne, or any single place. His presence had grown far beyond form. The universe bent around him like metal around fire. And still, he did not speak. He didn't need to. Across the galaxy, entire civilizations stopped. Fleets floated in stillness, not in fear, but in reverence. Empires that once laughed at Earth now kneeled before it, not because of orders, not because of defeat, but because deep inside they recognized him. The first, the one they had denied, the one they had buried, the one they were part of, even when they didn't want to be. And now his voice came. Not like thunder, not like wrath, but like a breath on the back of your neck. Return. That single word shattered space-time, but not in destruction, in release. Planets on the far edge of the Milky Way began to shift out of orbit. They weren't pulled. They followed, as if the gravity of Earth itself had reached across the stars and asked them to come home. Ships that had lost power decades ago suddenly came online. Machines that had drifted for centuries found their coordinates again. The stars began to move, not randomly, but together. They were rearranging, and from the center of it all, Earth glowed, not with fire, not with technology, but with memory. A kind of memory so strong it rewrote reality. Isla floated above the Pacific, the ocean still beneath her like glass. Around her, the last of the ancient sites awakened. Deep ruins under the sea, once thought to be myth, now pulsing like beating hearts. Atlantis, Lemuria, Kadesh, the cradle of Eden, they hadn't been destroyed. They'd been sealed. By her. In a past life, as the heart of the architect, she'd locked away Earth's oldest powers to keep them from being used in the wrong hands. She had sentenced the planet to forget itself. And now, she was setting it free. Cain stood atop Mount Ararat, arms outstretched. The sky above him cracked with silver light. The wind carried the whispers of billions. "We're ready," he smiled. They remember. The architect stood high in orbit, visible now in the night sky like a second sun. His form was vast, layered in armor and light, but still unmistakably human. Not alien, not divine, just complete. And in that completion the galaxy shifted. The Selath High Council, once proud and unbending, broadcast one final message to all systems. "We acknowledge Earth. We surrender to our origin." The Draxan, born for war, stripped their fleets of weaponry and turned them into arcs, vessels of pilgrimage. The Vareen opened their borders to all hybrid-born and let them choose their path. The Synth Collective, at last, stopped calculating and started feeling. Then the stars changed color. Not in heat or age, but in tone. Every sun, every star, every cosmic body that had ever touched a piece of Earth's scattered fragments began to glow blue. Software steady, the color of healing, of rebirth, because this wasn't conquest, this was restoration. The architect stepped forward, once, twice, and with each step, the rules of physics trembled. Black holes closed like stitched wounds. Wounded planets began to regrow. The very laws of nature bent toward completion. Because when a being who remembers everything returns, even the universe wants to make things right. Isla returned to Earth, no longer needing Cain to protect her. She had become something far greater, not a god, not a queen, but the core of it all. She walked into what was once the United Nations building, now remade by Earth's shifting architecture into a structure of smooth black stone and living metal. Inside, people of every kind stood waiting. Not just humans, but Vareen, Selath, Synth, and dozens of others. They were silent. She didn't stand on a podium. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke. "I remember." And that was enough. Because now so did they. The architect descended, finally, to Earth. He landed not with a quake, but with a hush. Grass grew beneath his feet as he stepped onto soil for the first time in 100,000 years. He looked at the planet, now no longer just a sphere of rock, but a living memory. He turned to Ayla, and their eyes met. No words passed between them, but the connection lit the air around them like fireflies. He placed his hand on her shoulder, and with that touch, humanity was no longer fractured. It was whole, again, at last. The galaxy paused, watched, and waited. But the architect did not attack. He did not demand. He invited. A single message spread through space, broadcast without sound, without code, through instinct. "Come home." And millions began to. Pilgrimage fleets, nomad tribes, rogue colonies. Even species that had abandoned their humanity generations ago turned their ships toward Earth, not as refugees, but as family, because the war was never against aliens. It was against forgetting who they were. And now they remembered. Years passed, the galaxy healed. The architect did not rule. He guided. Earth became a place of memory, of gathering, not conquest. Isla, as heart, became the keeper of wisdom, the voice of balance. Cain disappeared one day, leaving no trace, no message. Some say he returned to the stars. Others believe he became one with the soil again, waiting for the next fracture. But peace remained. Because now, peace had a purpose, not silence, but understanding. And across the stars, when children asked what changed the galaxy forever, they were told the same thing, in every tongue, in every story. One signal was enough. Because Earth didn't shout. It remembered.